So, Renato, what's going on with Alvin Bragg? Was he supposed to indict Trump last week?
It's complicated. I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet. Yeah, so Asha, yesterday, last week was a bit of a letdown for some people. They were all geared up. I know all these journalists were all ready to go, right?
I know. It was like, wah, wah.
Yeah, indeed. So I will say there was a lot of goofy conspiracy theories. I don't know. I ordinarily wouldn't call them conspiracy theories, but they were that lame. Even people who are lawyers were like, oh yeah, there's some secret deal between Jack Smith and Alvin Bragg to let Jack Smith go first and all this kind of crazy stuff. Very, very weird.
Yeah, I think, what I tried to emphasize when I had the chance was the only reason we got all spun up last week was because of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Claiming that he was going to be indicted on a specific day. And it's sort of like, we're like the, abused spouse who just, keeps coming back and keeps believing that I guess this time he must be telling the truth. And obviously he's not. I will admit I'm wearing my indictment wishbone necklace. My friend, Emily Brandwin, she gave this to me during the Mueller investigation. And
Wow.
I wore it during a time of promise. And then when all those hopes were dashed, I put it away. But now I've taken it out again. So, I too have been hopeful. But I think we were really spun up last week because of Trump's actions. Having said that, without going down into all of the conspiracy rabbit holes, maybe we should sort of unpack some of the different threads of questions that were raised last week. We can call it the Manhattan Bundle, since there's a number of different subtopics.
Buy two, get three free, something like that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk first about the delay. I think that was just a big question, right? So last week, timeline Trump tweets that he's going to be indicted on Tuesday. Everybody's waiting for this. And I think it was on Monday that his former lawyer, Robert Costello, came in to the grand jury and testified at the request of the Trump team, because in Manhattan, the defense is allowed to bring a witness in front of the grand jury. And then no indictment came on Tuesday. And then the grand jury did not meet on Wednesday, even though that was one of their normal meeting days. They did convene on Thursday, I think. And then it was crickets. And then we know that yesterday they met again.
We're recording this Tuesday, March 28th, by the way.
Yes,
so
sorry.
She means Monday. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Monday, Bragg brought in another witness, and there was drama and speculation on who this could be. And it turned out to be David Pecker, who is the head of AMI. Yeah, it's not AMI.
Yeah,
AMI.
the company that owns
the company that runs the National Enquirer.
Right?
Correct.
The AMR
the National Enquirer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm trying to be okay. So let's. What do we make of that? Because we know what Costello said, and then what Pecker would probably say. But then also there's the timeline issue.
Sure. So, I'll start with the timeline issue. I mean, what it means is that the prosecutors were still getting things together for the indictment. I mean, it's not uncommon for an indictment, whether, if it's complicated or important, to take a lot of time on the back end. Like, you think you're ready to go, and then you notice another issue or problem, or there's some loose ends you want to tie up, or there's another witness you want to talk to. Like, that's super common. What's not common is, all of the speculation and, Trump's statement and all of that, all of this anticipation. So for me, I actually think it's a good thing that they're taking a little bit more time. If anything, this seemed like a little bit of a rushed prosecution. So I understand it's been years since this conduct occurred, but the Manhattan DA's really only, from as far as we know, has only been focused on this in the past months, and there's a lot of issues here. So the more that they can tie down, the better. Costello, that was what I would call I think it's a questionable move by Trump's team, like to put in one of their witnesses into the grand jury because they're revealing to prosecutors some of their cards, so to speak. But one thing it does is it allows prosecutors to then scramble to deal with all the issues that he raised. And so that's what I suspect is a part of what they're doing here. The problem for Trump is that it would have been much more effective for them to be scrambling in the middle of a jury trial rather than them scrambling before indictment, when they can kind of fix everything and get everything in a row and then just indict him with their new theories and new evidence.
Yeah. I suspect that Trump is not necessarily a long-term thinker. And, I think that there was some checkers being played, I guess. I wouldn't call it chess, by claiming that he was going to be indicted on Tuesday, knowing that this witness was going to come in on Monday. And because then, nothing happens on Tuesday, and Trump has been claiming, we blew their case out of the water. And in Waco, for example, he claimed that, Alvin Bragg has already dropped the case. So I think he might have been thinking of it from spin purposes. And I don't know that his lawyers are the best in, the lawyers he can necessarily find. They're going to do what he asks them. But in terms of the substance, it also seems questionable. Costello, who ostensibly was brought in to discredit Michael Cohen, who's a main witness for the prosecution, he's no saint either. Like, this guy is super sketchy. He was mentioned in the Mueller report as someone who was arguably dangling a pardon to Michael Cohen, saying, you have friends in high places, sleep well tonight. I think the undertone here being keep quiet. But the story, as you said, I think they previewed one of their defenses, which his other lawyer, Joe Tacopina, has said on air in some interviews, which is that Stormy Daniels approached Michael Cohen saying she was going to go public with the story, and I think file some kind of lawsuit, and that Michael Cohen then, in an effort to keep her silent, on his own, offered her this hush money and paid her. And that only later did Trump learn that this had happened and then repay him.
Right. And just so everyone understands, that would very much undercut the prosecution's theory, because the prosecution's theory is that this was structured by Trump in a way to be a campaign finance violation. And so, this would suggest that this was just him responding in an ad hoc way to whatever Cohen came up with that would allow them to put the blame on Cohen, or at least to some extent. The issue is, of course, even if this was Cohen's idea initially, that doesn't mean that Trump couldn't have structured it whatever way he wanted later and have his own scheme later. But nonetheless, it would certainly put the focus on Cohen, and I think it would put in jurors' minds, because you have to remember this is like 12, random people like all of you listening who would be trying to figure this out. Probably people who are less informed about legal issues who would be listening. They might it would confuse the issues, I think, and would lead them to potentially to put the blame on Cohen. But as you said, Trump has nothing approaching the sort of lawyers you'd ordinarily have in a case like this. This is what I do for a living, and I know most of the other sort of lawyers in this space, and none of the people that Trump has hired are the sort of people you'd hire for a case like this. There are people like this guy Costello who are kind of shady, to use an ASHA term, right? They're a little sketchy, and so it doesn't really surprise me. One other interesting thing about Costello is, of course, he represented Cohen So Cohen at one point waived attorney-client privileges as the only reason that he could go in the grand jury. Like I said, I think this would have been far better to have been, brought out later. But Trump, like you said, Asha, he is very focused on sound bites in the moment. I mean, he was the one celebrating the Georgia Fulton County grand jury, right? Saying like they didn't indict me yet. So, it's a big victory. So, yeah, I think, like I said,
narrator, the special grand jury did not have the power to indict.
Right. Yeah, that's the narrator, indeed. and of course, it's not like we all know the foreperson. She's like, I mean, boy, not hard to figure out what they recommended. So her face, definitely not, she shouldn't be playing poker. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it also seems to me that they're really putting all their eggs in the basket that this is going to be a case that centers on the campaign finance violation. Mm-hmm. And maybe it is, but as you and I have discussed, there is another theory that they could plausibly do. And in that theory, the tax fraud theory, I'm not sure whether the issue of Stormy came to him or what he went to, like that would not necessarily be as relevant to that in any case. Because once you structure it in a falsified way in order to obtain some sort of tax benefit, I don't know that it matters, like when Stormy or who approached who and when.
I think that's right. I think certainly as a legal matter, I think practically speaking, if the jury thinks you were the victim of extortion, which is what I think Trump's trying to claim
I
now.
do think that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah, they're going to feel bad towards you. I mean, one thing that's really missing a lot of times from legal analysis on the internet, Twitter and so on, is like people actually kind of getting away from like what a legal textbook's going to say about things, and like thinking about how
juries are emotional.
Yeah, thinking about how a jury.
They're human.
Jury is going to jury. I mean, there's a lot a lawyer could do here to make Trump seem like he was a victim of something here, and he was dealing with a really difficult situation. That if a jury's very sympathetic towards him, and in that situation, it's very possible that they might not convict, even if there are good arguments that he may have broken the law. But I mean, I don't think that's being done masterfully here, at least based on what I've seen. So we'll see how it plays out. But it's not crazy to try to work on a story.
Just muddy the waters. Yeah, one way or the other. So to that point, it looks like the person that Bragg brought in, so Michael Cohen was on standby, reportedly, to rebut Costello's testimony, but he was told that he was not needed. Then we had, these couple of days where nothing happened. And then yesterday, David Pecker was brought in. And David Pecker is, for the story that we believe Costello told, I think the right witness to bring in to rebut his testimony, because we know from the court records from Michael Cohen's case, where he must have been interviewed, and all of that is kind of his version is locked down there, that Trump came to him for help in the election on, how Pecker could help him out. And the agreement was made to do this catch and kill arrangement for any stories that could come out that could be harmful to Trump. And so there was that agreement there. Now, I don't believe Stormy Daniels' case specifically was mentioned there, but it does go to the fact that Trump understood that, and Michael Cohen was there also. These three people were all in the same room together, and that Trump understood well before the Stormy Daniels issue came up that the agreement was that they were going to quash these stories and bury them one way or the other.
Yeah, an important place where his story is memorialized, I think, is in the non-prosecution agreement with the company between the Southern District of New York. Yeah, so I think that there's usually what prosecutors do when you draw those up is you write out like kind of your full version of the story and force the other side to agree to it if they want a non-prosecution agreement. So that's what I think happened there. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Asha. He was the right witness to bring in, and what it does is you can see how it undercuts the sort of story that I was talking a moment ago might be appealing to the jury. Instead of this being like, oh my God, he's the victim of extortion, it's like, well, actually, unlike most people who are in the public eye, who have bad things said about them, here Trump had somebody looking out for him who was going to give him an opportunity to pay off everyone who would, say anything bad about him. And so this was just part of that arrangement. And so it suddenly seems a lot less sympathetic for Trump. So I think definitely a good witness for them to bring in.
And it goes more directly to the intent to engage in a campaign finance violation, because it was, here, like the quid pro quo, to keep information that could be damaging to his campaign from becoming public, which is obviously something of value to him and to his candidacy.
Yeah, it's a really good, interesting point. Which a very good point by you, Asha, which is, part of the problem here for the prosecutors, we've talked about this in prior episodes, is that, paying off, a woman that you slept with is not a typical campaign expense. And I think a fairly compelling argument can be made that there's all sorts of reasons why you might want to pay that person off. And having an arrangement like this, so a standing agreement with the company for all sorts of stories, this one included, but it could be a whole variety of potential stories because Trump's harm.
McDougal.
Right. But I mean, my point is it could also be other things, right? It doesn't even need to be an affair. It could be like he didn't pay his workers, or, he cheated somebody in a business deal, and that could be another story. And so which is good, which is, I think, a good thing for prosecutors, because then if it's basically for any kind of story, it seems much more like a campaign expense.
And the alibi that, I just wanted to save my wife and my family embarrassment becomes much less plausible.
Correct. I mean, that's how it would be. A prosecutor would want to frame it. It's like, this was basically an agreement. It's like an independent expenditure for a media buy. Here you're basically have this deal with this media company where they're going to let you know, and you're going to basically pay off people to not say negative things towards the end of the campaign about anything. And then it really, you could say, then the prosecutor should say, hey, the other side's trying to make this about something salacious, but that was just the overall arrangement he had, and tried to keep it very, very high level and focused on the campaign finance case.
Yeah. So that gets to the delay and what was actually going on, behind the scenes last week. Then there was what Trump was doing, which is his usual Donkey Kong routine, and, kind of
Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
Was he throwing barrels? Okay.
Yes, exactly. I mean, he was getting kind of more aggressive, shall we say, as the week went on, right? Like he initially was like, protest, take our nation back. And then by the end of the week, he had posted a picture of himself holding a baseball bat next to a picture of Alvin Bragg, and promised that death and destruction would rain down upon our country if he were indicted. And so there were a lot of questions, I know, asked of us to address in the podcast of, could those be the basis for additional charges? I mean, if he's, especially the baseball, I mean, he's directly threatening the prosecutor.
Yeah. So I actually was talking to a friend who's a New York lawyer about this. So it could be something, a crime called menacing in the second degree. But I'm just going to say kind of more broadly for folks, this is the sort of thing, like, this is an interesting intellectual exercise, sort of like, when we were in law school, you have all these law school exams where there's these crazy things that happen and you come up with all these different ways where it could violate the law. And that's like, shows you're smart and gets you a good grade in the exam. It's very different from real life, where prosecutors are making decisions about which cases to prosecute, and you're going to have to justify it before 12 random people who are, got dragged out of their jobs to and their lives to sit there and listen to this. Like, you would never, I think, actually bring that charge. I think what it would do, though, I think the comparison I would draw is with the Crosshairs social media post.
I was going to ask about Roger Stone.
Yeah, Roger Stone did, where the judge she was not happy about that. The judge imposed a gag order in the case, basically to prevent future conversations of this type during the pendency of the case. So that could happen to Trump. Would be very a very complicated situation because he's a candidate for president and so on. But separately, I mean, it certainly would impact, potentially bond conditions since he hasn't had a detention hearing yet. Could also impact sentencing, obviously. Judge not going to look very kindly on it. So I think all of that is the real consequences of this, although sure, as a, theoretically, and you may have heard somebody on TV suggest it could technically be prosecuted as a crime.
When you said bond conditions, so I looked this up, because I understand that New York has had, bail reform and all of this stuff. And it sounds like dangerousness is not considered as a factor in terms of posting bond. And that this is not even a bailable offense, like what he would be charged for. So in other words, I think I'm just trying to get to, in layman's terms, is there it seems to me completely not plausible that he would be detained or even, I mean, yeah, right?
No, that's right. Oh, I agree with that 100%. He's not going to be detained.
Or that he would have to post bond.
That's right, 100% too. Okay. So if I was representing a client in this situation, I tell him you'll be out on bond, no question. Like that's not even an issue. I think though, in white collar cases more generally, there are a variety of different bond conditions. Now, I will say that, I've had cases in New York, but there have been federal cases, not state cases. So I don't know about bond. I have not negotiated a bond agreement in New York state court, but in other state courts and in federal courts across the country, there are times where there are negotiations regarding conditions like, what you post or restrictions on travel or things like that, where there is some give and take with prosecutors. And I wouldn't view it in a legalistic lens, but it's like a leverage lens. Like, well, we have to come to an agreement on things and the judge is going to want that to happen. And, they could make some arguments. And so, I have to give a little bit and take a little bit. And so, menacing the prosecutor is probably not the best thing I want to do before that negotiation. Like, it just seems like a bad idea. And so I would generally tell my clients, if they're like, yeah, I want to, attack the prosecutor publicly and try to, threaten him in some way, like, let's not, bad idea. But that, it is what it is.
And a gag order is interesting because if a judge issues a gag order and he violates that, then he is exposing himself to contempt of court. And I don't know what the ramifications are of that, if that would result in anything. Like, what if she imposes the gag order and the next day Trump is back, posting photos of, I don't know, him like doing violent things to Alvin Bragg or saying things. What happens then?
Well, she can conduct an evidentiary hearing, determine that he's done that, and then that's a separate crime. As a practical matter, what I'll say is when someone is standing in judgment of your life, effectively and making a determination about your punishment, pissing them off is a really bad idea. So I just, it's a common thing that in criminal cases, if you are a criminal defense attorney, you have to deal with clients who are colorful and or less than ideal in terms of how they conduct themselves. Trump is sort of in his own category, but it's not. It's a fairly common thing to have to explain to clients like, "Hey, we really need to be on our best behavior for the next 18 months because you haven't been sentenced yet, and we really want the judge to think you're a fantastic guy. Can you volunteer at the Salvation Army or something like that?"
Well, as I noted, Trump plays checkers, not chess. And we have seen in many other instances where he basically confesses to crimes on his social media platform. So I'm not sure that he really heeds the advice of his lawyers.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I mean, he has this sort of, I think he views himself almost like some sort of dictator, whatever. I mean, you can use whatever term you want to use, but this idea that the country's going to rise up and there'll be uprisings against us all if he gets indicted. I mean, it's sort of megalomaniac, right? I mean, it's just crazy. But I think actually the arrests work. I don't think we're going to see all of these people descending upon the courthouse that he expects.
I agree. Okay, so last in the Manhattan bundle, one of the other effects of him truthing out that he was going to be arrested last week.
Truthing out, yeah.
Well, I think that's what he calls it. They're not tweets.
He calls it.
Is that the Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee issued a letter to Alvin Bragg demanding information from him. I think even asking him to come testify to, explain why he, and I mean, charges haven't even been brought yet, by the way, but basically to explain why he's thinking about bringing charges, or if he's brought them by then, why he did that, and whether it was politically motivated. And the letter's very problematic on a lot of levels, though I think depending on what Alvin Bragg charges, I think they could have some legitimate footing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I thought it was pretty bogus. I mean, that was my general reaction to it, because their real hook in getting Alvin Bragg to come testify was that there's federal funding involved, right, in the prosecution. Seemed like a very thin read. I mean, ultimately, we have federalism in this country, and state and local prosecutors do their own thing, and it's not up to Congress to sort of supervise that or evaluate it in any way. And certainly Bragg, I mean, had the right reaction, which is, hey, this is a grand jury investigation. I can't talk about this, buzz off. But yeah, I think when you're saying there might be something to it, you're probably referring to the fact that this appears to be involving his conduct regarding a federal election offense, right? Federal campaign.
Especially if I think the Bragg hooks the falsification of business records to the federal election campaign finance violation, which, as you've noted before, is already, you think, the shakiest legal theory to go down. I think then they would have to narrow the scope of what they're asking for, and they can't interfere in an ongoing federal investigation. But at that point, they are in the arena of an arguably valid legislative purpose of, this federal law is being used by the state and being invoked to prosecute a presidential candidate. I'll just leave it there. I'm not defending. I'm just saying when we think of what is colorable versus what is completely, batshit crazy, I think, this could fall on the other side.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's fair. I think that the reality is, as many people learned during the Trump presidency, Congress's ability to haul people in when they don't want to on questionable grounds is it's challenging, right? It's challenging for Congress to make that happen when the people don't want to cooperate. So I'm skeptical of whether Alvin Bragg will appear in the halls of Congress.
Yeah, this is more about the theoretical versus the practical, in the same way that we were talking about whether Trump would be charged with a menacing or something like that.
Also makes this podcast fun, because you're getting both sides of it, everybody. Because I think the theoretical is interesting. That's part of what makes it complicated, right?
It is make it complicated. And I think, that even if they would have to go down the road of, if Bragg doesn't come in voluntarily or answer the questions, they would have to issue a subpoena, and that gets litigated, and there would be federalism questions and all of these things. So a lot of it is theater, I think, and a way for these Republicans to signal their loyalty to Trump, to also muddy the waters around what's happening, and really delegitimize in advance any charges that could be brought.
Yeah, 100%. And generate clips for Fox News, of course.
MSW Media.